This is the story of EthanisOnline, a creator whose rise was only eclipsed by the gravity of his public implosion, and a life so meticulously live-streamed that his mistakes, betrayals, and unhinged rants are etched into the collective memory of the internet. Is he a misunderstood creator desperately trying to hold on to relevance? Or has his relentless need for validation turned him into the very spectacle he once mocked? You get to decide as we examine the highs, the lows, and the whirlwind that is EthanisOnline. The story of EthanisOnline begins like many others in the digital world, with ambition, experimentation, and a desire to stand out. Before controversy and clout became defining features of his brand, Ethan emerged as a relatively unknown content creator in the mid-2010s, navigating the chaotic space of YouTube. Initially launching under the moniker Sora in 2014, Ethan produced a mix of gaming and commentary content. Perhaps most disturbing is Ethan's knack for airing his private life for public consumption. His messy breakup with a former collaborator, punctuated by live-streamed arguments and leaked personal messages, dissolved into a public spectacle so toxic it prompted calls for intervention. And then there's the infamous incident where Ethan, in a poorly veiled attempt at revenge, went on a tirade about the collaborator's personal struggles, claiming they were unfit to handle the pressure of the spotlight. It's moments like these that have solidified his reputation as not just a creator in decline, but as a full-blown online spectacle. But Ethan's controversies don't stop at personal drama. His obsession with maintaining control over his narrative has led to disturbing patterns of behavior. During one particular stream, he ranted for nearly 2 hours about a subreddit dedicated to mocking him, accusing its members of ruining his life while simultaneously doubling down on the very behavior that fueled their criticism. He even leans heavily into clout-chasing tactics, from overhyping drama involving predator hunters like Alex Rosen to repeatedly attacking popular creators such as Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. His content often felt more like an attempt to farm outrage than genuine critique. And then there's his own hypocrisy, defending fat-shaming jokes one moment and raging against similar criticisms aimed at himself the next. His inspiration was drawn heavily from creators like Ethan Klein of H3H3 Productions and iDubbbz, known for their edgy humor and satirical critiques. These early influences were apparent in his style, though Ethan's initial videos lacked the controversy that would later define him. His first publicly available video, posted in 2017, was the Gearspiracy, which signaled his entry into the world of YouTube content creation.
But not too long ago, Mr. Gear posted a video. Experiment! Glowing 1000-degree knife versus Coca-Cola! And posted this at the perfect time because with YouTube's random tweaking of the algorithm, this shit was plastered everywhere. Couldn't escape it. It's madness. He seems to be the epitome of awful clickbait. He's got it down to a formula and it works. He really knows how to up the ante in his thumbnails too. Go from 1 lighter to 3 lighter to 4 lighter. How the are these life hacks? Why? Why?
The video showcased a young Ethan making commentary about a YouTuber, Mr. Gear, who makes clickbaity thumbnails. It was genuinely funny, as highlighted by the comments in the video. Some others pointed out just how far he has fallen from creating that type of content. While Ethan's early content was unremarkable, his skills behind the camera were already beginning to attract attention. By 2018, Ethan had started collaborating with rising YouTuber Nick Is Not Green, contributing significantly as an editor. In a Q&A, Ethan reflected on his role in Nick's second channel, proudly admitting it.
Nadia Barcelona asked, how many people do you edit for? I only edit for one person other than myself, and that's Nick. I edit I'd say 40% of the second channel videos that he puts out. I could not be happier or luckier to be in the position that I'm in. I'm super grateful.
He estimated that he had edited roughly 40% of Nick's second channel videos, highlighting his knack for video production and content strategy. These collaborations not only honed Ethan's technical abilities, but also offered him valuable exposure to YouTube's evolving algorithms and trends. However, even in these formative years, there were subtle hints of the direction Ethan's content would eventually take. Early supporters noted his tendency to prioritize engagement metrics over the quality or depth of his commentary. This mindset, the relentless pursuit of views, clicks, and shares, was already shaping Ethan's creative process. Known as the clout mindset, It reflected a broader trend among creators to sacrifice substance in favor of sensationalism. For Ethan, this approach wasn't yet blatant, but the seeds were planted. His experimentation with thumbnails, provocative titles, and carefully timed uploads showed an awareness of the power dynamics at play in the YouTube ecosystem. The ethos of creators like Ethan Klein, balancing humor, shock value, and critique, served as a blueprint for what EthanisOnline would eventually become. Next came his journey into BreadTube, which began with a gradual shift into content. Initially a gaming and commentary creator, he transitioned into political commentary inspired by BreadTube stalwarts like HBomberGuy. BreadTube, often heralded as a haven for politically progressive creators, occupies a unique space in the YouTube ecosystem. Emerging as a counterbalance to the alt-right pipeline of the mid-2010s, BreadTube presented itself as a force for inclusivity, progressive values, and critical thought. Its contributors sought to dismantle harmful ideologies through research-backed arguments and entertaining presentations. Yet, as noble as its goals appeared, the movement has long been mired in contradictions, and EthanisOnline became a vivid case study in BreadTube's inherent flaws. BreadTube became popular for promoting inclusivity, focusing on topics like LGBTQ+ rights, fighting against capitalism, and racial equality. However, its message of inclusivity often clashed with the habit of creating division, as some creators relied on mocking others and taking extreme moral stances to push their opinions. This mix of welcoming values and divisive behavior became one of BreadTube's most notable contradictions. Testing the waters with critiques of how low-hanging fruit figures like Ben Shapiro and satirical platforms like the Babylon Bee, Ethan aimed to position himself as a progressive voice. These targets were chosen deliberately. They were easy to mock, had established notoriety, and guaranteed engagement from an audience eager for takedowns of conservative figures. By engaging with this content, Ethan tapped into BreadTube's formula for virality, balancing a tone that mocked his subjects while reinforcing the values of his intended audience. However, as Ethan delved deeper into this space, the cracks in his approach and BreadTube's model as a whole began to show. The very contradictions that plagued the movement at large became glaringly apparent in his content. Ethan's critiques often relied on personal attacks and exaggerated language, which pushed away anyone not already part of his echo chamber. One example was his critique of Ben Shapiro, where instead of addressing Shapiro's arguments, Ethan focused on mocking his mannerisms and voice. While some found this funny, it highlighted BreadTube's tendency towards selective inclusivity, welcoming those who agreed but mocking anyone who didn't. Another clear example of this contradiction was BreadTube's selective outrage, something Ethan frequently demonstrated. Progressive creators were quick to criticize edgy humor from conservative figures, but often indulged in similar behavior themselves. One glaring instance was jokes about 9/11, normally a taboo topic under the same moral code he claimed to uphold. BreadTube, and by extension Ethan, tried to justify these moments as punching up rather than punching down, but this reasoning often fell flat. This double standard highlighted the hypocrisy in their approach and alienated wider audiences who saw it as insincere. Ethan's pivot to sanitized humor further exemplified BreadTube's limitations. In an effort to align with the movement's values, he stripped his content of much of the edginess that initially attracted viewers. While this move endeared him to the BreadTube audience, it also narrowed his appeal, fostering an echo chamber that discouraged dissent and critical thought. The result was a constant ecosystem where disagreement was not only unwelcome but actively discouraged. Ethan's comment sections, for instance, became breeding grounds for groupthink, where viewers parroted his perspectives rather than challenging them. At the core of Ethan's BreadTube phase was performative outrage, a calculated display of moral indignation designed to elicit validation from his audience. While Ethan often critiqued others for their perceived lapses in judgment, he simultaneously engaged in similar behavior, leveraging controversy to sustain his relevance. An illustrative example occurred during his live-streamed response to conservative satire on art, where Ethan lambasted it as disgusting while simultaneously joking about similarly sensitive topics.
Art critique is really just opinion, but a lot of people let right-wing propaganda cloud their judgment of modern art, whether they realize it or not. All because it helps them feel better in not wanting to engage with it. In an ideal conservative world, art is interpreted for people. through a YouTube video full of lying, misinformation, emotional manipulation, false comparisons, but this happens every day.
Ethan's time within BreadTube did more than reveal the contradictions of the movement. It exemplified its darker tendencies. By emphasizing sanitized humor, selective outrage, and performative morality, Ethan alienated broader audiences while fostering an echo chamber that stifled meaningful discourse. In the process, he became not just a participant in BreadTube's degeneracy, but one of its most glaring examples, a figure whose rise and fall mirrored the inherent flaws of the movement he sought to emulate. One of Ethan's most notable controversies was his critique of porn addiction. In a video, Ethan claimed that porn addiction was an overblown phenomenon, relying on outdated studies to support his position.
Because porn is a real addiction. Crack, you can stop that anytime. But porn? No.
He dismissed concerns surrounding excessive porn consumption, framing them as moral panic rather than legitimate health concerns. The backlash intensified with Ethan's attack on the NoFap movement, a community advocating for reduced pornography consumption and abstinence from masturbation as a means to improve mental health, relationships, self-discipline, and whatnot. In his video titled "The Most Insecure Men on TikTok," Ethan lambasted NoFap advocates, dismissing their movement as the product of incel culture and deriding its supporters as socially inept individuals incapable of forming healthy relationships. His commentary included hyperbolic statements like, "These guys are just ashamed they have to masturbate because they can't get laid," which painted the movement with an unnecessarily broad and dismissive brush. While Ethan positioned himself as an advocate for self-acceptance, critics argued that his take lacked the nuance required to address such a complicated issue. What made Ethan's critique particularly controversial was its overt hypocrisy. While he presented himself as a champion of self-awareness and open dialogue, his handling of the NoFap movement revealed a reluctance to engage with perspectives that didn't align with his worldview. He reduced complex discussions about addiction and personal growth to simplistic conclusions, disappointing those who expected thoughtful analysis. This trend toward hyperbolic and polarizing content extended beyond the NoFap controversy. Ethan's broader shift into political discourse often saw him favor dramatic declarations over nuanced perspectives, a move that resonated within BreadTube's echo chamber but alienated broader audiences. His growing reliance on inflammatory language and reductive arguments reflected a deeper radicalization, one that prioritized engagement metrics over constructive dialogue. Ethan's self-destruction through his content became most evident in his handling of sensitive topics and his increasing reliance on inflammatory rhetoric. Nowhere was this more apparent than in his handling of predator hunting controversies, his double standards regarding humor and morality, and his increasing tendency to shield problematic figures to score political points. One of the most polarizing episodes in Ethan's career revolved around his critique of Alex Rosen, a prominent figure in the online predator hunting community, and his involvement with exposing EDP 445, a disgraced content creator caught attempting to meet a minor. Rather than celebrating Rosen's efforts in exposing predatory behavior, Ethan turned his critique toward Rosen himself, making incendiary accusations that framed Rosen's methods as harassment.
So he and his weird little cameraman are just harassing EDP and asking him a bunch of really stupid questions like, "Why do you do this, man? Do you know that this is bad to do?"
In one particularly inflammatory segment, Ethan went as far as to label Rosen's behavior as predatory in its own right, stating, "He's no better than the people he claims to expose." These remarks sparked widespread backlash, not only from Rosen's supporters, but also from Ethan's audience, who questioned his motives in aggressively attacking a figure working to expose dangerous individuals. Ethan's accusations were widely regarded as baseless and indicative of bad faith framing. He failed to substantiate claims that Rosen's work constituted harassment, when critics argued that his remarks served more to discredit Rosen than to engage in any meaningful critique of the predatory hunting community. Ethan's tone came across as overly defensive, especially given the well-documented actions of EDP 445, whose behavior was far more heinous than anything Ethan accused Rosen of. Ethan's double standards further compounded his controversies. While he condemned Rosen for supposed harassment, his own commentary on Alex was littered with personal insult and inflammatory language, with him calling Alex a pedo multiple times. This hypocrisy became particularly glaring when compared with his previous stances against edgy humor and offensive jokes. For instance, Ethan publicly denounced inappropriate jokes made by other creators while simultaneously making remarks that were just as, if not more, offensive. This selective application of moral standards eroded his credibility and highlighted his willingness to twist narratives to fit his agenda. The fallout from these contradictions was severe. Ethan's audience began to fracture, with longtime viewers expressing disappointment in his increasingly shallow and lazy approach to content. His critiques often lacked depth, relying on surface-level arguments and cherry-picked evidence. Instead of engaging in thorough research, Ethan leaned heavily on his personality and emotional appeals, which only served to further alienate viewers expecting meaningful analysis. The React streamer debate became one of Ethan's most controversial moments, showing his clear bias and shaky understanding of content creation ethics. The debate focused on Ethan defending reaction streamers like Hassan Piker and Denims, who were accused of barely engaging with the content they reacted to. Ethan's strong support for them highlighted his inconsistent principles, frustrating critics who expected him to be fair and consistent. At the heart of the controversy was Ethan's insistence that even the most minimal reaction content could be valid, provided it was done in good faith. During one livestream, Ethan defended Hassan and Denims by arguing that their commentary added value simply by presenting the material to their audiences. This perspective received pushback from both creators and viewers, many of whom argued that this approach fell short of fair use standards. For them, the fundamental issue was simple. The lack of meaningful engagement or transformation in these reaction streams undermined the justification for using others' work. Many pointed to examples of reaction streams where the creator added little to no commentary, effectively turning their streams into unauthorized rebroadcasts. A particularly infamous clip of Hassan reacting to a video showed him eating on stream while the original content played uninterrupted for several minutes. This clip became a rallying point for critics of reaction content. Ethan's defense of these practices drew widespread criticism for appearing overly simplistic and dismissive of legitimate concerns. Critics argued that by defending minimal reaction content, Ethan was enabling a culture of lazy content creation that profited off of the hard work of others. Furthermore, Ethan's framing of the issue as a matter of curating content rather than transforming content was seen as a deflection from the real ethical concerns surrounding reaction streams. One of the most contentious aspects of Ethan's stance was his ideological bias. Many accused him of defending Hassan and Denims not because their practices were defensible, but because he aligned with them ideologically. Ethan's refusal to acknowledge the shortcomings of their content gave the impression that he was more interested in protecting his allies than in engaging with the broader ethical debate. In contrast, Ethan was quick to dismiss criticism of these streamers, labeling detractors as jealous or out of touch with modern content trends. This bias was particularly evident when Ethan brushed off critiques from smaller creators, arguing that they simply lacked the charisma or following to succeed in the reaction space. Ethan's bias became even more glaring when compared with his treatment of reaction streamers he didn't align with ideologically. For instance, Ethan had previously criticized creators like XQC and Pokimane for their reaction content, describing it as lazy and exploitative. This selective application of criticism undermined Ethan's credibility in the debate. By appearing to shield his ideological allies while condemning others for similar practices, this pattern of behavior left a sour taste in the mouths of many viewers, many of whom accused Ethan of contributing to the erosion of accountability within the streaming community. Soon after, he would foray into critiquing comedy, particularly TikTok comedians, exposed significant weaknesses in his analytical approach, and revealed glaring double standards in his content. His video titled, "TikTok Has a Comedian Problem," became a focal point of this discussion, as it targeted what Ethan saw as a troubling trend of edgy humor on the platform. However, the video and Ethan's broader critique of comedy quickly drew backlash for being shallow and ideologically selective. In the video, Ethan took aim at TikTok comedians who leaned into dark or controversial humor, portraying them as unoriginal or emblematic of a broader problem with modern comedy. One prominent example was his critique of Jimmy Carr, a comedian known for his sharp wit and provocative material.
He apologized. One of the last comedians that I found on TikTok is Jimmy Carr. I find him incredibly creepy, and I don't know a lot about him. I don't think I want to.
Ethan highlighted Carr's interaction with a heckler, framing it as an example of comedians using offensive jokes as a shield against legitimate criticism. During this segment, Ethan stated how his jokes weren't clever or groundbreaking. It's just shock value disguised as comedy, while also shaming him, of course.
Why does he look like that? Why are his eyes yellow like a Sith Lord? Why does he feel like he was built in Detroit Become Human? Who is this man? I'm frightened of him.
Carr's ability to handle hecklers and use humor to navigate tense situations has been praised by fans as part of his appeal, but Ethan dismissed it as outright lazy. Ethan's approach to comedy criticism also highlighted a broader issue in his content: his tendency to prioritize easy targets over meaningful critique. TikTok comedians, many of whom are amateur performers experimenting with their craft, became convenient scapegoats for Ethan to frame as part of a cultural decline in humor.
I really don't want to constantly be seeing ads for your stand-up show on my goddamn For You page. Is it really that hard to understand? Please stop doing this to me. More specifically, even than that, the video I tend to see the most from stand-up comedians on TikTok are like them duking it out with hecklers. And like, it can only go so many ways, right? Hey, look at me, I'm telling jokes on the stage. Hey man, you are not funny. Well, I don't particularly agree with that. You're bad. Yeah, well, no, you. I don't find these kinds of videos engaging at all, but they tend to go the most viral, and I kind of understand why. People love to see that kind of conflict in public. They love to see someone's show get interrupted. It's like reality TV.
However, his critiques often lacked nuance, failing to engage with the complexities of why certain styles of humor resonate with different audiences. Instead, he relied on dismissive remarks and broad generalizations, such as labeling entire genres of TikTok comedy as low effort or pandering to the lowest common denominator. Ethan's content gradually evolved into an echo chamber, appealing almost exclusively to a progressively aligned audience. By framing his critiques and commentary around topics that resonated with his core fanbase, he successfully solidified his position as a voice of reason within these circles. For instance, Ethan's pivot to political commentary often relied on performative activism, where he publicly championed causes but rarely engaged in meaningful action beyond rhetoric. His critiques of figures like Ben Shapiro, as mentioned earlier, or content mocking conservative values, were designed to resonate with his audience's ideological leanings, but they lacked depth or substantive arguments. Instead, they reinforced what his viewers already believed, fostering a sense of validation and loyalty. Yet this narrow focus came with consequences. Broader audiences began to see Ethan's content as overly sanitized and ideologically selective. His humor and commentary became more predictable, often regurgitating progressive talking points without deeper analysis. As criticism of Ethan's content grew, he leaned heavily into a victim complex, a strategy that allowed him to deflect accountability while garnering sympathy from his audience. This tactic became particularly evident when he leveraged personal struggles, such as claims of childhood abuse, to shield himself from scrutiny. While it's important to acknowledge the validity of personal trauma, Ethan's use of these experiences often felt opportunistic, surfacing primarily during moments of heightened backlash. For example, during the controversy with Alex, where Ethan was accused of hypocrisy over his selective outrage regarding Alex's actions, he responded by invoking his CSA experience as a justification for his stance. This victim narrative became a recurring theme in Ethan's content, positioning him as a misunderstood figure fighting against unjust criticism. By portraying himself as the target of unfair attacks, Ethan successfully rallied his audience to defend him, often directing their ire at his detractors. This dynamic created a toxic environment where any dissent was met with hostility, further reinforcing the echo chamber around his content. Ethan's manipulation of his audience extended beyond rallying them in his defense. It also involved priming them to turn on other creators. By doing so, Ethan encouraged his audience to view criticism of him as an attack on their shared values, effectively weaponizing his fanbase against his opponents. However, this strategy proved to be a double-edged sword. Over time, the same audience Ethan had cultivated turned their scrutiny inward, holding him to increasingly stringent standards. Instances of perceived hypocrisy or missteps were met with backlash from his own supporters, who now felt empowered to critique him using the same moral framework he had promoted. Ethan's performative progressivism is one of the most apparent aspects of his hypocrisy. He's positioned himself as a voice for marginalized communities, frequently discussing issues like racial inequality, LGBTQ+ rights, and gender inclusivity. However, his advocacy often feels shallow and opportunistic, aimed more at boosting his credibility with his progressive audience than effecting meaningful change. A clear example of this is Ethan's commentary on marginalized groups and their content, where he claims to champion their struggles while simultaneously leveraging these issues for clout. Rather than engaging in sustained advocacy or amplifying the voices of those directly affected, Ethan tends to use these discussions as talking points for his videos, leaving his audience with little more than surface-level validation.
It's called ideological subversion.
You are doing that right now.
That's why there's a bunch of purple-haired girls roaming the streets chanting, "There is only one solution, Antifada revolution." They do have a really good chance.
God, that was so cringe. What the hell does he mean purple-haired what? Gay men really are the weakest link. To like immediately turn on purple-haired girls or whatever, like that's very clearly like vice signaling homophobia in like the I'm gay and homophobic who does that? Dave Rubin. Does anyone know who that is?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm a power gay at the Sundance Film Festival, and I'm gonna find some gorgeous Jewish producer to hook me up with a TV show, because I have a genius-level IQ.
Guy who believes in IQ because he got really big number on it. I believe the racist IQ system. It's telling me I'm smart.
He even claimed to bully a kid for being gay at one point.
I ended up bullying a kid, and then we ended up being friends because I think we were both, I think he was gay, and I was queer, so.
Oh, you bullied him for being gay when you were gay?
Yeah, you know, kids have kind of a gaydar a little bit. He was either gay or autistic, I don't know.
As mentioned earlier, one of the most glaring contradictions in Ethan's content is his selective outrage, where he applies moral standards inconsistently based on the target of his critique. This double standard is particularly evident in his treatment of offensive humor. Ethan has openly condemned jokes he deems harmful, especially when made by creators on the political right. Yet, he exhibits leniency or even approval towards similarly edgy humor from those he aligns with ideologically. For example, Ethan once criticized conservative comedian Steven Crowder for a joke that made light of immigrant deaths, calling it tasteless and disgusting. However, in a separate stream, Ethan laughed off a joke from a progressive comedian about white casualties in a natural disaster, dismissing the backlash as people being too sensitive. This inconsistency made viewers question why Ethan failed to apply the same moral scrutiny to humor that aligned with his progressive values. Ethan's hypocrisy extends into personal matters as well, particularly surrounding his commentary on weight and appearance. In numerous videos, Ethan has mocked other creators for their physical attributes, often framing these jokes as harmless humor. The hypocrisy reached a peak during his feud with Alex Rosen, where Ethan resorted to personal insults about Rosen's appearance, calling him a disgusting slob. However, when he became the target of similar criticisms, his defensiveness revealed a stark double standard.
Jesus Christ, what is wrong with you? The escalation of that sentence was just crazy to hear. I do think it's a choice to be fat, but some lazy motherfucker can't stop stuffing burgers in their mouth. Like, oh my god, being honest about how much you hate fat people for looking fat is way less disturbing than what you just said. Obviously, being fat is not a choice. The amount of corn sweeteners in things that do not need them in the United States is unreal. Did you know there's high fructose corn syrup in things like chips, crackers, bread? And not only that, but there are a multitude of factors that dictate your weight. Genetics being the most important factor.
The commentary he just gave was on a video by Sensitive Society, who he also got into a conflict with, and it all began with a claim that the latter's commentary videos were essentially a gateway to right-wing radicalization. Sensitive Society, a YouTuber known for irreverent takes on online trends and cringe culture, often comments on topics like fat activism and extreme social justice rhetoric. While Sensitive Society's content is intentionally provocative and satirical, Ethan argued that it perpetuated harmful stereotypes and served as a stepping stone for viewers to adopt far-right ideologies. A key example Ethan pointed to was the video played earlier where Sensitive Society was criticizing fat activism. From there, he went on further rants, attacking Oscar, the guy behind Sensitive Society. Sensitive Society himself responded in a video, calling Ethan's argument dishonest, hypocritic, and lazy, and added,
Necessarily have a problem with lazy content as a rule, but do you really have to exclusively talk about e-girls and OnlyFans girls and trans people and fat people? Is that like really? Do we really need to hear more?
Ethan and Sensitive Society eventually engaged in a live debate, which was widely anticipated but quickly devolved into chaos.
This is such a unique argument because it's like, well, your video was next on autoplay or Ben Shapiro's.
No. I'm
Okay,
telling you.
That was my fault. And on top of that, I want to say, this is regarding this and regarding everything. I am not responsible.
Okay, so we're not
for
talking about what I'm
ignoring-
talking. We're moving on from what I was talking about. Cool.
Okay, I'll just address it here.
Well, you
Like, it's
just don't want to
so
talk about what you're moving on.
Bro, let the guy talk.
Rather than addressing the substance of their disagreement, the conversation became a series of personal attacks and passive-aggressive remarks. Ethan's frustration was evident throughout, with his tone growing increasingly dismissive.
Why would you say that? It's just like rude. Why would I think that's just because you're insecure you said that. That's weird.
What, fat?
Yeah. You're like, I wasn't like a fat. I was cooler than that. Like, I was better than that. That wasn't me.
I never
It's
said
like,
I was better than
you have
them.
to understand how you sound when you say stuff like that. It's so weird.
One notable moment occurred when Ethan started smoking mid-debate, claiming it was to calm himself down.
I'm gonna pick my up.
Smoke it.
You said that.
The gesture was seen by many as a theatrical display, further emphasizing the tension between the two. Sensitive Society, in turn, accused Ethan of not engaging in good faith. The debate, however, highlighted two key issues with Ethan's approach. Ethan's tendency to conflate commentary content with larger societal issues weakened his argument. By framing Sensitive Society as a gateway to radicalization without concrete evidence, Ethan alienated viewers who saw his critique as an overreach. And also Ethan's reliance on emotional appeals and personal attacks, such as calling Sensitive Society a grifter who thrives on outrage, undermined his credibility. The debate could have been an opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue, but Ethan's combative approach ensured it became little more than a spectacle. Later on, something similar would happen between him and Moist Critical over modern art. You see, Ethan's approach to modern art is both intricate and contentious. He believes that all art is inherently political, a position he defends by arguing that art cannot exist in a vacuum, devoid of influences, messages, or implications.
There's a political component, right? All art is inherently political, either in its influences, messages, or implication. 101, guys, this is a baby.
He used this claim to argue that modern art is often propaganda rather than genuine creative expression. However, he contradicted himself by deriding political undertones in art that don't ally with his preferences. One of his key criticisms was the aesthetic shift in art. He compared classical works like Michelangelo's David with installations such as Levitated Mass, which he famously reduced to just a rock.
More deceptive language, more lying by omission. We all know Michelangelo and his classic rock. It's actually called Levitated Mass, if you even care. I've seen it in person, and it's really cool. It's not just a rock that you look at, like other sculptures. It's a sculpture that you walk under.
This is like the world's first discovered homosexual caveman.
However, Ethan's critiques were riddled with contradictions. On the one hand, he claimed art is subjective, stating that no piece is technically better than the other. On the other, he dismissed artists like Thomas Kincaid as uninspired and repetitive, basing his judgment on their perceived lack of depth.
Thomas Kincaid, Robert Florczak, it doesn't matter. Uninspired art is uninspired art.
At its core, Ethan's critique appeared politically charged. He frequently framed modern art as a battleground for ideological control, arguing that there is no art they cannot propagandize. This perspective was weird to many who felt his commentary focused more on personal biases than on the art itself. Ethan's contentious critique of modern art reached new levels of visibility when Moist Critical came into the picture. Their clash began when Ethan criticized Charlie's casual dismissal of certain modern art pieces, particularly Levitated Mass. Ethan accused Charlie of failing to grasp the depth of such works.
Then he doesn't look up what it actually means, because Charlie isn't talking about what's in front of him. He's talking about what he thinks is in front of him. I think there are so many different ways to interpret this installation.
This critique painted Charlie as anti-intellectual and reductive. In response, Charlie defended his position, emphasizing the importance of personal connection over intellectual posturing. For Charlie, art's value lay in its ability to resonate naturally with the audience, a perspective that clashed with Ethan's insistence on contextual interpretation. Ethan's behavior in online feuds continued to reveal a clear pattern of hypocrisy, particularly in how he selectively applies moral standards depending on who's involved. For instance, Ethan has frequently criticized other creators for engaging in harassment or targeting individuals perceived as vulnerable. Yet his actions, as we've seen, directly contradicted those principles. This lack of accountability in addressing the inconsistency further fueled accusations of hypocrisy. These patterns not only alienate critics, but also complicate his relationship with his audience, as even his supporters are forced to reconcile his actions with the values he claims to uphold. Ethan's relentless pursuit of clout has become a defining trait of his online persona, one that has earned him equal measures of infamy and disapproval. While he claims to hold a moral high ground, his actions often reveal a glaring hypocrisy that undermines his credibility. But Ethan's story is more than just a personal failing. It exposes the structural problems with online activism. The internet rewards creators who cater to algorithms and trending topics, often at the expense of nuance and genuine engagement. Ethan's downfall reflects the pressures faced by creators to produce content that is not just popular, but controversial. Content that sparks outrage, reinforces tribalism, and prioritizes virality over value. In this sense, Ethan is not merely an outlier, he's a symbol of a broader cultural issue. The real issue then is not about EthanisOnline as an individual, but about the environment that allowed his rise and fall. In answering this, perhaps we can move beyond the noise and towards a more meaningful exchange of ideas.